All right, everyone. Stay with us. We have two guests, which we will who will be able to speak sequentially to you. And we will start with Maximo Torero, the Maximo Torero Cullen, the Assistant Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization. And our guest will talk to you about the policy brief on food security that just went out. Mr. Torero, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So let me briefly refer to the topic of food security and consistent with the brief presented by the ASG today. So first, it's important to understand how distinctive and complex nature of the emerging crisis and how things get much worse the longer this goes. Many unknowns, but large downside potential. And let me make a parallel with a box event. Essentially, up to now, we have gone through the first phase, which is the first jab, which was the lockdown because of COVID-19. And we are now entering into the second jab, which is the food crisis, the economic crisis, which is the consequence of the COVID-19. The problem is that to be able to keep until the end of the fight, we need to be aware in every step of it, because COVID-19 has not been eliminated, and we are at risk at all times that we get a knockout in terms of the food security in the world. Clearly, it's important to recognize that food security is essential for our economy. The scale of the scope of the food economy measured as people is 4.5 billion of 7.8 billion on Earth. So nearly 1/3 of whom are exposed to disproportionate risk. So it's a huge part of our population that are at risk. Not only that, on formal employment in the food systems, we are talking of around 32% of the world working on food systems formally is at risk because of COVID-19. And this means around 431 million people at risk because their jobs are at risk because of COVID-19, and this is mainly in food processing, food packaging, and transportation. 60% of those jobs are at risk. So the third point that I want to raise is the action plan that was outlined by the Secretary-General. The first one is the urgent need for good data to see where and how people are being affected, both rural and urban. What we are observing today is that there are significant new hotspots of food insecurity because of the levels of unemployment in the urban and peri-urban areas. So it's not only the typical food crisis countries, but also expands to other regions of the world. So we need to be very careful in identifying those invisible today so that they are part of all the social transfer programs and safety net programs to minimize the potential vulnerabilities. Second, the need to scale up and adapt social protection to make it work for nutrition and to protect people, especially food workers, livelihoods, and where necessary, lives. This is very important because today we run into the risk that we will even deteriorate more in other forms of malnutrition, like overweight and obesity. What we know from previous crises is that people, when they have less capacity of access to food, will immediately move to more calorie-based foods, and that will increase their risk of overweight and obesity. And today we are running into a crisis of overweight and obesity, in addition, of course, to the problems of undernourishment, which are huge. And third, repurpose, accelerate, and scale up investments to protect smallholders who are at risk of long-term loss, as well as vulnerable and excluded groups, and begin building to transform while protecting and beginning to restore our common planetary home. It's essentially that we do proper investments so that what we invest will solve problems that will make our system, our food system, better for the future. And today, our food system right now is failing us. We started in a vulnerable situation with 820 million people in undernourishment, significant levels of overweight and obesity, significant levels of stunting. So we need to keep working and to transform our food system, but especially with COVID-19 and the risk that this is imposing, we need to bring solutions and especially help the most vulnerable as soon as possible. So there is no time to wait. And again, every round we run the risk to have a knockout, and we have to avoid this. Thank you very much.
I'll now up for questions.
I cannot hear you.
Yeah, it keeps muting me.
Farin, we're trying to open your microphone and it keeps muting. It's open. It's open. We're opening it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Please proceed.
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Now, we'll go to. Thanks for your opening remarks. We'll go to questions from the press, if there are any. Please signal to me if anyone in the press has a question.
I have a question.
All right. Go right ahead.
My question is, does the UN realize really the value of bees for nutrition and how they help the economy, and also with the virus, the importance of the bees and the honey they produce? And a lot of the developing countries could have beehives. They're not expensive. You just need a queen bee and a few other bees cooperating. You can sell the honey for the economy, but also for the local people. It's much healthier than sugar, and particularly with the virus, with people drinking a lot of tea. And I feel that there was a bee day at the UN, and it was very important. It was sponsored by Slovenia, and I believe by Nepal. And I know that Singapore is very involved in the breeding of these bees. I think it's important because it's an easy way to help the in poverty, and a way to sell the honey. It brings a big price.
Mr. Torero, do you wish to respond? Thanks. Mr. Torero.
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so the bees are essential, and FAO gives a huge importance to them. For centuries, they're the harder working creatures on the planet, and they have benefit people, plants, and the environment. They carry pollen from one flower to another, so pollination is one of the major roles. But as you mentioned, also they produce honey, which has significant micronutrients and are important complements in what we call healthy diets. So for sure, outside of their job of pollinators, which is crucial for us to have food, we need pollination. What they produce through honey is an essential element that we need to take into account in what we refer as healthy diets, which are, of course, based on what locally is available, or the different elements of food that you can bring into your diet. But yes, they play a crucial role, and the bee day is the 20th of May.
Yeah, great. Are there any further questions? If there are no further questions for Mr. Torero, we will go to our next speaker, the Chief Economist at the World Food Programme, Arif Husain. Mr. Husain, are you online?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks very much. Very much for joining. Please proceed.
Okay, so let me start where Massimo stopped. I think it's quite clear that COVID is coming at a situation which was already quite bad. We talk about acute hunger. 4 years ago, we had 80 million people in acute hunger. At the end of 2019, we had 135 million people in acute hunger. So COVID is compounding already a bad situation to begin with. For us, what is really, really important is to make sure that we are able to reach people who are in worst possible states even before COVID came. What I mean by that is that of this 135 million people who are in acute hunger, about 30 million of those are already in emergencies. And these people, I mean, they are essentially those who are caught in conflict, whether it be in Yemen, whether it be in Syria, in South Sudan, in Northeast Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, a whole bunch of countries. And what we need to make sure is that we are able to reach them regardless of anything, including COVID. Because if we don't, they end up paying the ultimate price. The second thing which is really important right now is that we understand food insecurity, hunger was there because there are some root causes. It is conflict. It is still the biggest reason why most people are going hungry. It is climate shocks. It is economic marginalization. It is all of those together. And then on top of that, COVID. So at the moment, we are saying about 265 million people who are in acute hunger. What going forward in terms of our recommendations, like the SG said, like the Secretary General said, what is really important is to save lives and also protect livelihoods. We are working towards getting, in a given year, last year as the World Food Program, we assisted about close to 100 million people. This was through food, this was through cash to about 28 million people. It was about school meals to about 18 million children. It was about nutrition for mother and child for about 17 million children. We need to continue this. But we need to not only continue this, but actually increase it. The second thing is that all that we are doing, that is a drop in the bucket, given the magnitude of the problem with which we are dealing right now. That's where the importance of social protection, safety nets, working with the governments, creating the fiscal space in these governments so they can implement their own safety net programs, and agencies like ours who have the experience, whether it was through Ebola or through large-scale social protection programs, could assist. The third thing, I think what is really important, and I think Maximo alluded to that as well, is the agricultural sector. We have ample stocks as we speak, but having ample stocks right now is no guarantee that we will have ample stocks next season, next year, which means that we need to treat the agricultural sector as an essential sector. Farmers must be able to go to the fields to plant, to harvest. Seeds must come to them. Fertilizer must come to them, because if it doesn't happen for any reason, we're going to have a bigger problem next year. So these are some of the things where we are pushing and pushing hard to make sure that we are, till we get to a stage where there is an affordable treatment for everybody around the world, we save lives and we protect livelihoods. Last thing I wanted to say was, we are worried about a few places in the world, especially the southern hemisphere, especially places in southern Africa, where you are starting out extreme poverty. You're starting out with undernourishment. You have had history of HIV/AIDS. You have had history of TB. You have had successive climatic shocks, and the health sectors don't work there quite well either. So that creates a cocktail with which we need to be ready. Otherwise, we will see things which I don't want to see. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Mr. Husain. Please, those of you who are still in this virtual room, I can't see any hands raised, and I don't see any questions in chat. So please let me know if any of you have any questions.
I would like to talk. I would like to talk.
Oh, yeah.
I know some of my viewpoints may be a bit exotic, but I've been studying where there's food. And now, when I went to Japan and China, they gave me fried locusts as a delicacy. I'm wondering why, with the total terrible locust infestation now, they can't be also somehow or other prepared for nutrition.
Thanks.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, there are parts of the world where people do get protein from different insects, but I think the situation sometimes is time sensitive. People are not used to, so they need to have the time to adapt to something which they're going to do. And here, if you're short of something, that is time. So if you have never tried anything of a particular type, and frankly, nobody is giving it to you in that sense, bringing it to you and saying, here, try it or test it or anything of that sort, because of many, logistical issues, cultural issues, all of the above, it's very difficult. So these are the things which we need to think about when we are out of crisis. This, to me, is about preparedness of. This is about, okay, how can we increase our food supply? How can we bring in protein? How can we do other things, but not to try it during the emergency, but start before. It is almost like emergency preparedness than emergency action. But there are many things we can do. And I think if there is one lesson we can learn from this crisis, is to be better prepared for the next one, because believe me, there will be a next one.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question from Toby Burns from NHK. Toby?
Thanks very much, Farhan. A question for both of our panelists. Sometimes with reporting on food statistics, it's a little bit difficult because the most efficient way to grade the scenarios is in terms of different bars, like level 1 is, and then level 2 is famine, and 3 is acute insecurity. But I'm just wondering if you might be able, in the sake for the sake of the clarity of writing about your findings, if we should be focusing on one specific number that you discussed today, like 265 million, or just a little help with the communications aspect of this to get the fundamental impact of what you're trying to say. Thank you very much.
If I can, I would say that basically we have a IPC integrated phase classification scale, basically, which is 5 phases, if you will. So phase 1 is you're okay, phase 2 is you're stressed, phase 3 is you're in the crisis, phase 4 is you're in emergency, and phase 5 is catastrophe or famine. So when we are doing these numbers and we talk about acute hunger, especially out of this 265 to 135 million, that is people who are already in crisis or worse situation. So phase 3 and above. And then the second distinction comes between what is chronic and what is acute. Chronic is something where you go to bed every night the same way, that's your life. You're hungry not because a particular shock happened, you're just hungry. And then comes the acute part, where frankly you were okay, everything was fine, and then the shock happened. Now that shock could be war, like we see, that could be a drought, that could be a landslide, that could be an earthquake, all kinds of different shocks. And that's what we call acute. So right now what you have is 2 things. One, you have acute number of people hurting over the last 4 years, going consistently up. That was what I was saying, 80 million to 135 million. Then you have COVID, which is affecting some of those same people, but it is also affecting other people who were already, before that, they were okay. So think about people in the informal sector. Think about people in the service sector. Think about manufacturing, Bangladesh garment industry. Think about Kenya tourism. These are the people then, because they're in lockdowns or they've lost their jobs because tourism isn't going anywhere or remittances are not coming. Before, with remittances, they were fine, but now they're not. So this is the addition of this, and by the way, this is a projection of 130. So 135, which we know till end of 2019, plus a projection of 130, which is changing as things will open and other things will happen. gives you the 265. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Torero, do you also have anything to say to Toby's question?
Only one comment. The IPC classification that was referred to, right now a country is in food crisis if it is in IPC 3 or higher, okay? Now, what is the risk today? The risk is that the level 5 is a situation of famine. So basically what you need to avoid, what we want to avoid is countries which are in IPC 3 or 4 to move to 5. That's the first element. Because once they move to 5, there is no way back. That's what I call the knockout, okay? So essentially, these people are in famine situation. Now, the problem is that we also have a significant amount of people in IPC 2. And that's the risk, that the probability of people in IPC 2 will move into IPC 3 and therefore will move into the food crisis. So it's very important to be very careful with the numbers, but the situation is extremely, extremely vulnerable right now. In addition to that, we measure the effects of poverty. And there are several simulations in terms of the impact of extreme poverty, people moving into extreme poverty. Initially, the World Bank projected that 55 million people were moving into extreme poverty. Other centers have projected around 130 million people moving into extreme poverty. So the numbers vary a lot, and it depends on what we are going to face in terms of recession or GDP decline. Today, the World Bank has published that the outlook for GDP decline is 5.2%. With that outlook of GDP decline, that will imply a significant increase in food insecurity, in undernourishment in the world. Just to give you an idea, a 5% decline in GDP growth will imply around 38 million people moving into undernourishment. A 10% GDP decline will imply around 80 million people moving into undernourishment only for net food importing countries. If we include all the countries of the world, we are talking of around 120 million people moving into undernourishment, which is an addition to the IPC classification. So again, we need to look at this very carefully because we need to be very careful with numbers. People get shocked by big numbers, but the conclusion is that we are in a pretty complex situation, and the figures that we are observing in terms of the recession are extremely high, and we need to act quickly to be able to minimize that potential migration from IPC 2 to IPC 3, or especially the potential migration from IPC 3, 4 to 5, which is what we don't want to happen.
Thanks very much. I have a question now from Ibtisam Azam. Ibtisam, please unmute your mic.
Hi, Farhan. Thank you. I have a few questions also to clarify something. So the number 820 million people suffering from hunger, could you please say in which areas, and is it only mainly in countries that suffer from war and acute climate changes? And the additional number that you have in the report, the 49 million people, is this only this year added to this 820 million? And then is it possible to when we talk about acute hunger and the differences, what does it mean for the daily life of people? Does that mean that they are food insecure, they can't find their next meal? If you could just clarify these things. And the last thing is about Yemen and the situation they are facing there. If you could talk more about the problems there, given the fact that the UN did not get enough money for the aid they were hoping to get. Thank you.
So let me start with, so this 821 million, this is acute hunger. So this includes India, this includes other countries where there is chronic poverty and chronic hunger. If you took this 821 million, you would see that about 60% of these people live in conflict-affected areas. Okay, so it is a mix. Now, what is quite interesting is that if you look at the acute hunger, this is what I was talking about, 135 million. 77 million people of those are affected by conflict. 34 million from climate shocks. 24 million from economic shocks. And by the way, it's never one, it is a combination of everything, right? But climate conflict, the biggest, then climate, then economic shocks, and usually a cocktail. Now, when you look at the regions of those, and I'm talking acute hunger, what you will find is that 73 million of those 135 million are in Africa, 43 million in Middle East and Asia, 18 million in Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is the distribution of those people. It gets even worse because then you have about 49 million wasted children. Okay, and the vast majority of those are in conflict-affected areas. And then you have about not quite 150, but slightly less than 150. I think it's 147 million or something like that. Stunted children. Still, vast majority of those in conflict areas. This is why it is so important to deal with the root causes. Root causes of hunger. COVID is highlighting already a bad situation. It is just compounding it. I think that's really important to note. For us, you asked about Yemen. We assist about 12, 13 million people every single month in Yemen. And that's what needs to happen. Because if you look at just food insecurity numbers, it's close to 20 million. If we don't have enough resources, we are not able to do this. And this is why we talk about these 30 million. The vast majority of those 30 million people are in Yemen. I will give you another example, which is Syria. In Syria, the big problem right now is the currency there is literally tanking. Officially, some say it's 435, others say it would be 700. In the market, it's over 3,000 Syrian pounds to a dollar. And the impact of the Lebanese crisis on Syria is immense. The banking crisis in Lebanon on Syria is immense. So 9 years of war, losing jobs, currency tanking, inflation up the roof. I was just doing numbers. Today in Syria, the prices of a regular food basket are 16 times higher than they were pre-crisis. So these are the realities, and these are the people who then are in the emergency phase, IPC phase 4. And there's not a big jump. This is what Maximo was saying, from phase 4 to phase 5. And frankly, if you get to phase 5, you've already failed, because famine means people have already died. Famine means that children have already suffered, and famine means that 20% of the population is already starving. 3 conditions must come together for us to declare a famine. So it is not about saying, okay, let's act because there is a famine. It is about let's act so there is not a famine. And we need to be very clear that we understand that distinction. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Husain. Mr. Torero, do you have anything to say about Sam's question?
Yes. First, on the definitions, which I think is really important to have them very clear so that we don't have a confusion. And there are two concepts that we are using. One is acute food insecurity, which is any manifestation of food insecurity at a specific point in time of a severity that threatens life, livelihoods, or both, regardless of the causes, context, of duration. So it's a manifestation. So, for example, the major drivers of acute food insecurity will be conflict, weather shocks, slowdowns, what we are facing today with the recession, and climatological. But then the other concept, which is the 821 million that you were referring, is what Arif mentioned, is the chronic food insecurity. And chronic food insecurity is a long-term or persistent inability to meet dietary energy requirements, which will last for significant level of periods of a time during the year. And this is what FAO calls undernourishment, and that's our indicator, ADG indicator POU. So the 821 million is chronic food insecurity or POU or undernourishment. While acute food insecurity is what is reported in the Global Food Crisis report, which is basically this manifestation of food insecurity. So that's why the difference and why the numbers are different. Now, if we said that and we refer to the number that you referred, the 49 million or the 50 million, this is the number of people moving into extreme poverty as defined by the World Bank, with the poverty line of extreme poverty. And what the World Bank is saying is that around 50 million of people will be moving into extreme poverty, okay? Which it correlates with the measure of acute food insecurity and chronic, but it's not a one-to-one correlation. That's why the numbers are different. Now, these 50 million people is a number that is over the year, what they are expecting to be over the year. And what we need to be clear is that a person can move, if you have a job today and you lose your job today, that person today doesn't have an income. So today, that person could be classified as a person that is moving into extreme poverty. But that will change tomorrow if you get a job, which the probability is potentially high, which is different to what the bank is predicting, which is basically during that year, you will be classified as extreme poor because you won't be able to get the minimum income you need to be able to pass that line of extreme poverty. So three different concepts: acute food insecurity, which is food insecurity at a specific point in time and severity; chronic food insecurity, which is a long-term persistent inability to meet dietary energy requirements; and the last one is the point of extreme poverty, which is of a basket of food and for the period of a year. So that is essentially the three definitions that we work with.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further hands up, but one reporter did send a question in by text. I think you've already dealt with this, but
can I ask a question?
Hold on, please. No, hold on, please. You can have this after. So Deepak Arora from the Tribune Online has asked about any other hotspots in the world regarding food insecurity. I know that you've touched on this with Ibtisam's question, but if you have anything to add, either of you, please go ahead.
Look, what we are facing because of the levels of unemployment that we are facing in the world, even imagine in developed countries, we're having rates of unemployment of 20%. In developing countries where most of the economy is informal, 60 or 70% of the economy is informal, with the lockdowns, all these people lose their activity, their economic activity. And all those people, basically, if they didn't have savings, will move into a situation of food insecurity. And this will create significantly new hotspots in new areas. Of course, some of them will be able to reactivate their economies, but the ones who cannot go back immediately into a job because small businesses, informal businesses have been closing and so on and so forth, those are the areas where we believe new hotspots will appear. A second area where, in the case of the food industry and the food systems, where we are seeing significant risks is in everything that is related to the food processing. So from packaging to processing to transportation. In those, the jobs that we are observing at risk is around 60% of the jobs in any of those areas. And again, those people will lose their jobs, will lose their income, and they could be losing their livelihoods. So those are areas which are normally in peri-urban, they are not in rural. They will be in peri-urban areas which will be affected. And of course, the third is the rural areas, no? And how much they will affect it will substantially depend on how much they will be able to get an income. Because what we are expecting is that with the recession, the potential demand for what they produce in the rural areas will be significantly reduced. And that will also put them at risk.
Abdulhamid, did you have a question you were just trying to ask a second ago? I think I heard someone.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask about if you have any reading or predictions about the situation in Gaza and in general in the occupied Palestinian territory. Thank you.
Okay, would either of you want to answer that?
Mr. Hussein?
It was coming in broken.
It was a question about the situation in Gaza, if there's any concerns about the food situation there.
Well, I mean, you know, we are monitoring situations in all the places where we have offices, and trying to get to, you know, through you know, whatever is possible at this stage to see how not only how the situation is, but also more importantly how the situations are changing. So we have an office in Gaza, which is doing the normal food security monitoring. We are looking at Lebanon, we are looking at Jordan, we are looking at all of Middle East. Already spoke about Yemen and Syria, and here I think the most critical element is there's the dynamic situation. What you see today is not necessarily true for tomorrow. So constant monitoring matters, and this is what we are doing for most of these countries. Where we cannot go out, we are trying to use remote monitoring systems to actually find out what's happening. I just wanted to also, on the question previously, what are the hotspots? I already mentioned Southern Africa as a hotspot, where, you know, it's not, hunger has always been there. It's the depth of hunger which is increasing. So more people are getting hungrier, if you will. But then you have other places which are coming up, right? And what we are seeing is places like, I mean, think of countries or people who rely on remittances, which countries are, you know, in terms of their GDP, having huge chunks of remittances, whether it is in, if you're looking into the Americas, think of Haiti, think of Nepal, think of Tajikistan from Russia. And when something is happening in Russia, or something, you know, job losses in the US or job losses in Gulf, that creates a problem. So those are the new hotspots which are becoming, and that's where we say that it's not the depth of hunger, it's the breadth of hunger which is increasing. More people are becoming hungry. So we have both depth in certain places and then breadth in other places, which is going on as we speak. So,
Anything to add?
Only to add that in the case of Gaza, because of the way how the population is there, and because of the deterioration of the health sector, and of course because of the economic flow, restrictions like the ones of the lockdown will have significant impacts in their poverty, and 80% of the population already depends on humanitarian aid. So this put a lot more pressure, as Arif was saying, and tension into the situation, plus not being able to have the health system in place makes even riskier the probability of expansion of COVID-19 and the potential consequences of COVID-19. So there is a need of significant acceleration of the mitigation of these risks to minimize the potential problems in Gaza. So it's a pretty strong risk that the situation could worsen substantially.
Thank you. And I'd like once again to thank our two distinguished speakers, Maximo Torero Cullen from the Food and Agriculture Organization and Arif Husain from the World Food Programme. Thanks very much, and thank you all for attending. Have a good afternoon, and for those of you in Rome, have a good evening.